As I was invited to do this discussion where I was told we wanted to talk about cyber offense, I said, wow, that's really a hard topic to do in front of an uncleared commercial industry group, right? And when I teased out a little bit more about what the intent is, the light bulb went on and I got it. It was talking about taking an aggressive, forward-leaning stance to address your cybersecurity problems instead of just playing passive defense and working within the constraints of kind of the historical way we'd done cyber defense. And with that, I was all on board. I was because as I look at it, the last year, 2017 was a heck of a year for cybersecurity. May 2017, we had the WannaCry attack, right? A massive destructive tool unleashed on the world by North Korea. That was significant in the amount of damage and the threat to life that this malware spreading brought to our nation and the world. June, we had a cyber attack hit Ukraine in the NotPetya software. But it was not only a cyber attack that hit Ukraine, but that one also spread uncontrolled across the globe. We had in August the data breach at Equifax, where I imagine almost everybody in this room had their own personal details compromised, right? From a company that none of us were likely directly interacting with, providing our information and providing the agreement that they would store and protect our personal data. It continued throughout the year at that kind of pace, but those are three watershed moments in the history of the way we do cybersecurity and the way threats hit each and every one of us, whether it's the corporations that were impacted by some of those big events, or whether it's us personally and the way we were hit. So it wasn't just 2017 as an unprecedented year of threats and attacks, but it was also a year where the U.S. was maneuvering and taking that forward, up on the balls of our feet stance to go address these. Soon after inauguration, President Trump signed off an executive order on cybersecurity, and it really had four fundamental elements: the federal networks, the critical infrastructure of the U.S., international deterrence, and a common base underneath all of it, which is developing the skills and workforce we're going to need to address this kind of future. In December, we reworked the vulnerability equity process, which is the place we consider how the government deals with vulnerabilities it discovers in consumer and IT products, and how we weigh the security of using those to defend the nation against security threats versus pushing those out to patch them. And we've also had a huge amount of effort from our Department of Justice and FBI on cyber criminals. November, there was an indictment on the hacker tied to the Iranian military who compromised the HBO networks and attempted to extort them for the information they stole. Later that same month, a Canadian citizen pleaded guilty to aiding Russian intelligence officers, two of whom we had indicted earlier in a 2014 hack of Yahoo that exposed as many as 500 million accounts. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. So an aggressive offensive stance trying to push forward in this world that seems to be changing daily around us. So what are we looking at as the year comes up? One of the big concerns I have is what I will call the fragmentation of the internet. Well, we're all concerned about cybercrime and the security of our networks. We're also really concerned about other countries around the world really creating this convoluted patchwork of laws and regulation that impact our ability to move data. Some of it is in the Chinese internet security laws that they've rolled out and the impacts to our companies and our ability to do business over there. Some of it relates to the way regimes are trying to be oppressive to the people who would voice ideas and try to use the internet for free flow of information. And other pieces of it are along the lines of how we're able to interact and what we're expected to protect and store. So the GDPR coming online in Europe is going to change the face of the internet. And what I mean by this is all of these things drive us to balkanization, localization of the way the internet is used to service the people who are on it. And if we go to the lowest common denominator where everybody builds their walled garden and data has to be localized and data is exploited by totalitarian regimes, it really cuts at the core of that fundamental internet that the US helped envision and pushed out there. And in fact, the US companies have done so much to shape and drive. And so from where I stand, what we're really at is a point where we need US leadership to correct some of these faults that are happening. I think the folks that are seeking to create these insular networks to use unintelligible regulations to drive their views just unempower what we've seen as the free and open society, the internet. And if unchecked, we're going to see this as a huge global problem over the next couple of years. So for the foreseeable past, we've taken a hands-off approach on the internet, which was really important to its innovation and growth. But what we've seen now is these rules driving us to a place that's unsupportable. For instance, as we try to chase these cyber criminals who are stealing our information and driving us in the US, what we've found is the inability to get data as a company may hold it offshore. So today, if we bring a warrant through the courts to Microsoft and say, I need information about this hacker involved in this commercial espionage, Microsoft is happy to supply the data that they hold in the cloud in the US. But if some of that data is in a cloud in Ireland, they turn around and say, I don't have the authority to reach into Ireland and pull that data back, even though it's Microsoft's proprietary data. Similarly, when folks in England are trying to get data, whether it's about a terrorism case, a child pornography case, or a cyber espionage case, and they come to Microsoft and say, hey, I've got a warrant from my court in the UK, Microsoft can't give that data over. It has to go through a convoluted mutual legal treaty assistance process that takes an enormous amount of time. So we're trying to propose, we're working with some congressional folks on the Hill to do an information sharing law that allows US companies to be responsive to foreign subpoenas and the US government to be able to pull data from a US company in response to a court order that may be out there stored in other places in the company. What this means is the ability to move forward at an aggressive pace and take the offense against some of these folks that continually, day to day, storm the battlements of your companies, your personal information, and your freedoms. The big thing about this is that our legal structure is now not responsive to the way the plumbing of the internet is wired. So we've been looking a lot at the problem. We think we've got a good construct. The bill is up on the Hill. It addresses some issues like, well, what if China wants to come in with a warrant to a US company on a series of dissidents? The agreements are structured such that the Attorney General and the Secretary of State have to review these proposals from other countries to assert that they have rule of law and a due process legal system and that they have good humanitarian rights. So we'll start this with some of our closest, best allies in this space, like the UK, who share our values, share our legal constructs, and we'll make it work. And then we'll see about others who can pass that bar, who hold our similar values and aren't looking to balkanize the internet for repression of the people. So I would encourage those of you who are interacting and looking at legislative issues, take a close look at the US-UK data sharing agreement that's being proposed and thought about. This is really an example of where US leadership can change the shape of what we're doing on the internet and knock down some of the walls that have prevented us from pursuing the cyber criminals and other criminals who are using this to bad events. The other big thing we're looking at this year is how do we do deterrence? When you step back and look at deterrence, it really is all about cost and value. Today, doing bad things on the internet generally brings you more value than the expected cost. People are not worried about getting caught. Countries are not worried about the impacts of doing malicious things on the web. When we're thinking about deterrence and consequences, it means that the onslaught of cyber attacks this year are not being prevented because those individuals, those criminals, and those nations have done this little calculus in their head, and they've thought about it and said they get more value than the risks. So as we think about cyber offense, for me, that's a place where we have the leverage, is the ability to start to inflict upon those people the idea that they're going to have consequences for the actions they're taking. We've had discussions in the space of cyber deterrence where a concept of shooting the archer rather than trying to duck the arrows and block the arrows as they arrive at you is one that's commonly discussed. So for me, shooting the archer isn't the literal sense of I send cyber bits over and stop them in an offensive way. It really is about shooting their motivation and mentality that says, I can get away with this. And from the US government stance, we have a series of tools we can use. Those are the big diplomatic levers. They're the judicial indictments and arrests I talked about earlier. For the US government, there's a big thing we can wield in terms of sanctions and secondary sanctions, which have probably the strongest effects on other nation states. We have the ability just to do naming and shaming. And in fact, that is one of the things that altered the US-China relationship on the commercial espionage was shining the bright light on the things they were doing, the way they were behaving, and the activities they had. And you will see us through this year continue that, to put that information out, put the evidence out, and let folks know that they can't get away with the kind of things that they've been doing. So at the governmental level, putting that cap above and beyond, over and around the nation in that sense. We will do a lot of things to partner where possible, but we can't strive for international consensus in every case, right? There are times, again, for that American leadership, we're going to have to be out in front. We're going to have to put our name and reputation on the line in calling out the bad behavior where others won't. And you would be surprised at times when we try to move the ball forward and get other nations to stand with us to call out some of this behavior, the reluctance they have to shine that light on it. And I think you'll see us pushing much harder, bringing others with us throughout the course of this year. So what can you do out in the commercial and private sector? One of the lead things you can do is addressing risk. If you look at cyber espionage, cyber theft, the intrusions, the crimes, almost all of it is motivated by that value proposition I talked about. And you can separate this out into multiple bins. One bin is the people who walk around and jiggle the cyber doorknobs to see if something's unlocked. We had an issue this year in my neighborhood where there was a group of kids coming through and checking cars at night. And if the doors were unlocked, they were stealing the stuff in them. You wouldn't expect that to be a rewarding, lucrative occupation for them, but they were getting iPads. They certainly were getting other things that were left in the car, but I was astounded to hear what some neighbors left unlocked in in a car, right? So, you know, yes, it's an illegal act. Yes, I live in a pretty decent neighborhood, but and maybe that contributed to people leaving their cars unlocked. But there was an amount of negligence on the part of the people who just left the cars unlocked. Certainly the police were stepping up patrols and in the end helped find and catch these guys. But there's an amount that has to happen from us to make sure that we take care of ourselves in this environment. And so for that, it starts all the way down at the fundamentals. Thinking about how you're doing patching, how you're doing upgrade policies, how you're building your network architecture, how you're even resourcing those teams who are going to do the cybersecurity for your company. In the government, part of the executive order was about accountability. It was saying that the IT responsibility, to include the failures like we had in OPM, are not the responsibility of the men and women who are in your IT shop. They're not the responsibility of the CISO. They own that, but in the end, the ultimate accountability is up at the department head, up at the secretary head, who has made decisions throughout the course of doing business at the government level to decide how they're aggressively recruiting talent, what policies they let through, how much they push back when the IT experts tell them, no, we've got to make it a little bit harder, but that in reality is going to make us so much more secure. And it's also about putting the money and the investment in doing the things we know how to do, right? Simple things like thinking about two-factor authentication. It's surprising how much government and private industry just simply hasn't adopted that really basic, strong protection of having multi-factors to protect your data. Thinking about in the IoT world, what gets hung directly accessible to the internet and what is protected by layers of security. So at the very least, if there are latent flaws or poor design choices in that device, it's not accessible by the world, and the people jiggling the doorknobs can't come up and see the problems that you have. So we're pushing on accountability, and I would encourage in the private sector the same, right? We've got to roll this up. It's great news that most boards are now taking on a cybersecurity expert. I think that's crucial for somebody at that level to be asking cybersecurity questions, especially when cybersecurity has become an existential threat for some companies, that your data really is the value in your company, or your data leaked and exposed could be the thing that brings down your company because of the loss of shareholder value or the liability that comes behind it. So thinking about the role you can take in the attitude and culture is a huge security asset for the coming year. So I mentioned the idea of shooting the archer. Some have really proposed the way that nations protect their networks, not just the government networks, but commercial networks, is to centralize their defense. I think there's important value in doing some of that, right? Having the experts drive those things. For the US government, we're doing a lot more with shared services. Why? I can have the Bureau of Land Management run their email server, but the chances are that's a 1- or 2-man shop really responsible for that. And if you think about it, the people coming out of a high-end school, whether it's a Carnegie Mellon or a Stanford, or name your favorite high-tech school, chances are that their top grads aren't going to raise their hand and go, I'm headed to do cyber at the Bureau of Land Management, right? They're going to look at the opportunities around there, and they're going to be happier to go to big, sexy jobs in cyber, whether it's private industry or other places in the government. But I still need that protection inside those government networks, because one chink in our armor means somebody's inside the fence, and then they start to move and propagate and get to other places that I care a lot about. So with that, what we're trying to do is to push together some of the common defenses of the government and make much larger teams, right? If you look at some of the high-end webmail service providers, you're exceptionally well protected by going to some of those high-end companies. Why? Because they have teams of hundreds of experts who are responsible for the security of that enterprise 24/7, right? And they're hiring high-end talent and they're investing in it to a level most smaller aggregate groups cannot. Same situation in government, and I would encourage, in your commercial world to think about how that aggregation can help. Some people have proposed, as we talk about offensive cyber, that offensive cyber capabilities are the antidote to malicious cyber activities and credible deterrence. It is a tool in our broad and diverse portfolio of how we deter. But overall, offensive cyber starts this cycle where the acts necessary to preposition to understand in that are inciting and escalatory. And so looking at offensive cyber, it has to be used in the right place at the right time, and thinking about it as a general defense for companies and countries overall. It's got to be a sparing solution in the tools that the government uses, and I believe infrequently or not used at all in the commercial world as an inherently government activity. One, again, that's escalatory. So I think that well, we can't be certain about where these threats and capabilities are going to head. Overall, in 2018, what you're going to find is the U.S. government emphasizing several things. You're going to see us emphasizing leadership, right? Trying to drive down the bad ideas, the bad changes that seem to be getting a little bit of momentum around the world, especially in the totalitarian world, that looks to shape the ability for us to use what was built and intended as a free and open internet. You're going to see us working with other countries because there is strength in numbers, and there's others that share our desire to secure the internet. But what you're going to see is us not work to the lowest common denominator and at the slowest speed of the least willing to join us. You'll see us lead, work with a partner, and then ask coalitions to join at our speed and be left behind if they can't keep up. You'll see us emphasize the fundamentals because in the end, just locking your doors is an important thing, and the people who can't be bothered to lock their doors are going to be pilfered and burgled in this area. Locking your doors means resourcing and capabilities and intent to secure your network, and that starts way up at the top with accountability and leadership. And so you'll see that happen in the U.S. government. We're going to encourage and foster that wherever we can in private industry. And you're going to see us emphasize, focus, and resource cyber from the government. So with that, I wish you a good day and good conference here. I think that the focus and emphasis on this is so important. And the fact that you're investing your time, that you've got experts coming together to give you that advice is outstanding. So thank you for your time and attention, and good luck throughout the day.